Welcome to the 4th week of the Satipatthana Course. By now you are getting probably a little bit deeper into your meditations. By deeper I mean more settled, more collected. The mind is more collected around the breath, the walking. There's less longer trains of thought, less forgetting of the meditation object and being lost in the hindrances. And you're starting to develop more clear awareness of what's happening from moment to moment, from moment to moment, in both the body and in the mind. And so at this point, we're going to start going into the observation of mind. Mind is called Citta in Pali. It is not just the thinking mind, but also the feeling mind. So Citta can also be translated as heart mind. Anything which is not the body is the mind. Anything which is not the direct contact of the 5 sense doors of hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching. Everything else is mind. So this week we're going to read this part of the sutta. It's also quite short, and go into what exactly the Buddha wants us to observe in the mind foundation. I read. And how, monks, does he in regard to the mind abide contemplating the mind? Here he knows a lustful mind to be lustful, and a mind without lust to be without lust. He knows an angry mind to be angry, and a mind without anger to be without anger. He knows a deluded mind to be deluded, and a mind without delusion to be without delusion. He knows a contracted mind to be contracted, and a distracted mind to be distracted. He knows a great mind to be great, and a narrow mind to be narrow. He knows a surpassable mind to be surpassable, and an unsurpassable mind to be unsurpassable. He knows a concentrated mind to be concentrated, and an unconcentrated mind to be unconcentrated. He knows a liberated mind to be liberated, and an unliberated mind to be unliberated. In this way, in regard to the mind, he abides contemplating the mind, internally, externally, both internally and externally. He abides contemplating the nature of arising, the nature of passing away, of both arising and passing away in regard to the mind. Mindfulness that there is a mind is established in him to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness. And he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how, in regard to the mind, he abides, contemplating the mind. The contemplation of mind is quite simple. So far we've been observing the mind and the activities of the mind. It is like observing the content of mind, the contents of planning, of thinking, of remembering, of imagining, of worrying, of anxious thoughts, of excited thoughts. Here we are engaging more with the content of the mind still. But it's good. It's a step-by-step process. We start investigating and becoming aware of what is actually happening there in the mind. But the primary concern of the Buddha in regards to the mind is this mind with lust, anger, and delusion, or without lust, anger, and delusion? Because the Buddha's primary concern is suffering and the end of suffering, or dissatisfaction and the end of dissatisfaction. And we have these 3 unwholesome states of mind which are creating all of the suffering, all of the dissatisfaction in our life. And that is the lust, the anger, and the delusion. In other words, that is the craving, the aversion, and the ignorance. the greed, the hatred, and ignorance. So, of course, there's varying degrees of this greed, hatred, and ignorance. Sometimes very subtle, sometimes very obvious, very strong. But our job is just to be aware when the mind is with craving, with aversion, with ignorance. And as we start to become aware of this, the mind starts to release the craving, start to release the aversion, start to release the ignorance. And this is actually also the progress of right effort. So right effort is this balancing quality of what we're continuously doing in our mindfulness practice to more effort, more calm, more tranquil, more relaxing. The right effort is to keep abandoning every time unwholesome states of mind arise, unwholesome states of craving, of aversion, and of ignorance, of not seeing things clearly. Then the Buddha goes on to citing different types of mind, and he breaks it down into quite simple states. So it's not about the specific emotion or what we're experiencing, it's more about the way the mind is in that moment, the state of experience. And it's a kind of metacognitive awareness of how is the mind paying attention at the moment. Is the mind contracted when we are very contracted, when the mind, the space of mind is tight, is small, is with tension, when we are over efforting, striving, when we are trying to get somewhere else, I need something, there's this contraction in the mind. So we need to be aware this is actually also a body sensation in the head mostly, but also a contraction of the mind space. I want this, I need this, I don't want this. This contracted, this mind which is like a closed fist, a tight fist. Distracted mind, we know when there is distracted mind, so it's okay, it's the nature of mind to be distracted, and when the mind is not so collected, there is many distractions arising, unrelated thoughts, unrelated content to the meditation. So we just know this. Every time we realize it, we are already doing our job. We know, right now the mind is distracted, and we smile, we relax, we come back. Now the mind is distracted. Smile, relax, come back. And sometimes the mind is very narrow. Sometimes the mind is very zeroing in on something. Very tiny, very narrow in terms of its scope of movement. Sometimes the mind is very great, very spacious, very open. So it's also kind of this progress of sometimes it's contracting, becoming small, tight. Sometimes it's opening up. The space of awareness starts opening. There's spaciousness. There's more stillness. And then it becomes narrow, it becomes great. Surpassable and unsurpassable. So this is the mind which is where there are things which are better and worse than each other. No, the surpassable mind where this is better than this very black and white mind, and this starts to dissolve into the more non-dual mind, the mind that is not comparing this to that, but this mind state becomes open, expansive. Just a moment that's happening. Just this. So there is nothing that's better than just this, because this is all there is. Surpassable mind is there's always something better than what's happening right now. We're running after something. And sometimes the mind becomes unsurpassable. More and more starts opening up. Then the translation is concentrated, unconcentrated. I don't like this translation too much. I prefer collected, uncollected. The original word is samadhi. The mind with and without samadhi. So samadhi means to collect or gather. So it's the mind which is gathered, collected on something simple, like the breath, like body sensations, like the feeling of relaxation. So we know sometimes there is this collectedness in mind, sometimes we sit down, there is this distracted mind, contracted mind, which is running about. So we are just aware. Now the mind is more collected, now the mind is more uncollected. And finally, the mind that is unliberated and liberated. The mind that is with attachment, with trying to get something else, trying to go somewhere, and the mind that is liberated from attachment, the mind that is free, the mind that is just dwelling in the present, with mindfulness, observing what's happening. This is the liberated mind. And more there's moments of this liberation. You are tensing, you are holding onto something, you recognize the contraction, you relax, you smile. And the mind in that moment is already the moment of liberation, of the micro hit of nibbana, of the relief of, I don't need to. The mind opens up, the mind relaxes. And then the mind becomes with much less craving, aversion, and ignorance. Sometimes the mind is more with these three things: craving, aversion, ignorance. The triangle. Sorry, this is a triangle. More craving, more aversion, more ignorance. We look closely and that structure starts to dissolve. There is just this. It's all just my thinking. It's all just hearing, seeing, feeling. I will talk a little bit more in detail in the next video of this triangle. So this is basically our job. Just be aware when there is craving, tension. Be aware when there's not. Sometimes you can't do anything. Sometimes take some time for the craving to dissolve. Keep relaxing the head, the brain. Open up to what's happening. And the refrain. Contemplating the mind internally and externally. So contemplating the mind that is busy with external things, external phenomena that are happening. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the thoughts about the external world. And the internal mind, the mind that is busy with what's happening here. Busy with the meditation. Busy with figuring out how is the meditation going and how are we doing it. We abiding, contemplating the nature of arising and of passing away, of both arising and passing away. So every stage of mind, the distraction arises and it passes away at some point. The great mind arises, there's space, there's openness, and then it passes away again. The collected samadhi mind, there's more concentration, more depth in your meditation. And then again it disappears and you're distracted again. So just noticing this change, this arising of certain minds, this passing away of certain minds. The sleepy mind, the craving mind, the worried mind, the mind with hindrances, the mind without hindrances. And the rising and passing away. As we get deeper, we start to see very deeply that each moment there is a mind which arises and passes away, a certain kind of perception. It's not as continuous as we think, it's arising, passing very quickly. And you understand this is the scope of mind. This is what is mind, this is what is body. More and more you're understanding. It's not like a binary thing, you understand it once. It's more and more deepening the understanding. Body is body, mind is mind, feeling is feeling. And there is bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness. So in the beginning our mindfulness very much interrupts what's happening. So our mindfulness is, we have to think about our mindfulness. We have to remind ourselves verbally inside our head, be mindful, be aware of this, be present, let go. And more mindfulness becomes just observing, not interacting, not intervening, not interfering with experience, just knowing what's happening, knowing the craving, knowing the aversion, knowing the absence of those, and continuously, moment by moment. Sometimes you'll find gaps where you were gone, where you were drifting, but those gaps get smaller, more continuous. more intent every moment to be clearly aware of what's happening. And abiding, not clinging to anything in the world. Free. Free from the usual worries, the usual concerns, the usual desires. Free. Just abiding in this continuous mindfulness. And then understanding starts to arise, insight into this body-mind process, which is continuously changing, starts to arise. Insight into the impersonality of this change. We always feel we have ultimate control, but there's this causes and conditions which keep arising, keep passing away. We don't have as much control as we feel, and we don't need to take it as personally as we do. And with that, there's also less angst, less anxiety, less worry, less hatred, less irritation. There's the mind which is becoming free, open. Good. That's it for the translation, and we will look a bit more closely at the details in the next video.